Glad to have you here on the Fiery 49 page. Today we're talking fuel system. Fiery 49 was in storage for almost a decade prior to it being donated to the Vintage Fire Museum, who we purchased the truck from, to start working on a restoration to put it back on the road. So anything that's not started, ran, or exercised in over a decade, you're bound to find some problems, and we have found plenty of other issues, but today we're dealing with the fuel system specifically. Glad we didn't find anything major, but we did have to address a few issues before we could actually put the system back in service and finally have a chance to drive Fiery 49 around under its own power for the first time in over a decade around the lot at the Vintage Fire Museum Annex. So hang tight and we'll run through what all it took to get the fuel system operational and take our first ride in Fiery 49. One of the first things we wanted to check on the fuel system of Fiery 49 was whether the fuel pump even still worked anymore. These mechanical fuel pumps have a rubber diaphragm on the inside that tends to dry out and crack. And if they crack, they won't operate. With the truck being in storage for a long time, we wanted to check the condition of the diaphragm. Also, the particular fuel pump on this truck has a sediment bowl type filter on it that's actually on top of the fuel pump. You'll see that in an upcoming picture. But so we needed it off for a few reasons. We wanted the lines off of it so we could blow out the lines and make sure the lines were free of debris. We wanted to take the actual pump off and bench test it and ensure that it was still, in fact, pumping fuel. And we could see from the glass bowl on the top and the sediment bowl that lots of gunk was inside at least the sediment bowl area of the fuel pump. We wanted to clean that out. So we just took the fuel pump off the truck and took it to the bench. And that was the first thing we addressed. And luckily we found out with a little cleaning and some bench testing, it was able to actually pump fuel through a loop system that we had set up with a bucket and some fresh fuel, and able to basically clean it out and put it back on. All right, here you see the entire fuel pump assembly along with the filter slash sediment bowl on top of the fuel pump. We're looking at the discharge side of the pump, the lever arm off on the right hand side. That would be inside the engine running on a cam lobe that would pump the diaphragm back and forth and pull fuel in and then push it out and up to the carburetor on the other side of the engine. You can see from the condition, looks like probably weeping some fuel at some point, but the main concern was the glass sediment bowl on top. You see the dark yellowish caked coating color. That should be clear. You should be able to see the fuel in the bowl when it's pumping, and if it's dirty or not, clearly varnished up, clouded up. So we'll take that apart and look inside and see what we find. All right, in this picture, we have removed the glass cover for the sediment bowl off the top of the fuel pump. It's done easily. There's a thumb screw on the top. You just loosen the thumb screw, pull the wire cage out of the way, and it comes off. It was completely dry, but as you look in here, you can clearly see why. We made no attempt to put fuel in the truck before checking things out. All of the brown debris, the rust, that's all sediment out of the fuel tank, interior fuel lines, debris that comes from fueling systems, everything else. There's no pre-filter on this. The filtering system on this truck works simply by fuel comes up from the bottom of the fuel pump. This is sitting as it would in the truck. Fuel would percolate up from the bottom and settle. These heavy sediments would set in that glass bowl and sit where they're sitting in this picture. And then as the fuel fills up and the sediments fall out, the fuel would flow back through the screen there on top and go to the pressure side of the fuel pump and be pushed to the carburetor. Simple system, but you can see just how much it actually catches, and clearly has not been cleaned out for a long time. So we'll clean this out, and then after we cleaned it out and we're confident that the debris was out, we tried to bench test it and found that it actually did still pump fuel. And this is just a quick look. This is the glass housing for the sediment bowl. You can see how caked up it is. But what you see inside there, that is in addition to what was also sitting atop the fuel pump. So when we separated the two pieces, that much dirt debris stayed inside the glass part of the housing. What you saw previously was also the fuel pump. So this thing was absolutely full, needed to be cleaned out. This is why you check things out and clean them before you try starting something up that's been sitting this long without any maintenance. Unfortunately, I did not capture any pictures or video of us bench testing the fuel pump, but it's a simple test. Once we had the fuel pump cleaned out and reassembled, we put a line on the intake side of the fuel pump, put it down in a fuel can, and worked the lever by hand, and it primed up and started pumping fuel back out, so we knew the fuel pump was okay. But before we put that back on the engine, we left it off and the fuel line from the tank to the fuel pump open, and then we went to the fuel tank and we pulled out the fuel tank sending unit. That's the piece that has the float and the mechanisms that actually show your fuel level on your gauge and your dash. So we took that out because it provided the best access to look down in the tank. Pleasantly surprised to find the tank itself was actually very clean. We didn't find anything in the tank that was concerning or required pulling it out to clean it out. Seemed like the sediment bowl had captured everything at the fuel pump, but the tank was clean. They had at least drained the fuel out of it. We didn't have any fuel left sitting in it from a decade prior, which was a good thing. So having looked inside and inspected the inside of the fuel tank, and we blew the lines out, flushed them out, made sure the line from the tank to the pump was clean, and put the fuel pump back on the engine. We gave a quick look to the fuel sending unit while it was out of the tank. The mechanical components of it, it moves free. They seem to be intact. We didn't check the resistance and see if it actually changes, where it can still give a voltage signal to the fuel gauge. The big issue, and obviously where all the sediment in the fuel bowl on the pump came from, is from the float here. This is a brass type float. Obviously the corrosion has eaten the bottom of it out. This may be something that happened and occurred while the truck was actually still in service. It ran in service from 49 until 82 and beyond in Lindy, Nebraska. At some point, someone may have noticed the fuel gauge stopped working, and it's because these holes had appeared, the corrosion occurred from this floating on top of the fuel, and eventually it would have filled with fuel and just sunk to the bottom. So we'll definitely have to get that replaced. We'll also check the fuel sending unit at a later time to see if it's still working appropriately. If it is, we'll make some basic repairs as an easy fix, and we'll get the fuel gauge working. Well, after we put the fuel sending unit back in the tank, and we put the fuel pump back on the engine, reconnected the lines, and then we went to the carburetor and ensured the line between the fuel pump and the carburetor was also cleaned out. We put some fuel in the carburetor bowl just so it would go ahead and the engine could start on the fuel in the bowl, and a little fuel in the tank of the truck. Found no leaks, and we were able to fire it up and finally run it for the first time. Well, after we had the truck running for a few seconds and realized the fuel pump had picked up and the truck was going to continue running off the fuel in the tank, our first drive was a short one, but we went straight out of the building and down to the garden hose to ensure the radiator and the cooling system had fluid in them. This would also be our check to make sure we didn't have leaks there. So a short first drive, but it's awesome. It's an awesome feeling to finally get to drive it for the first time and feel it move under its own power.
That's unbelievable. Hasn't ran in what 8-10 years at least?
Probably. Maybe I'd just round up to 10.
Oh yeah, definitely moving easier. Brakes are loosening up.
Yeah.
Clutch needs a little lube.
And from this point forward, after we filled up the radiator with water just to ensure the engine didn't overheat, we checked for leaks after we'd ran for a little bit. No leaks in the system at that time, although the heater core would come back to bite us later. But we just enjoyed driving the truck around. The more we drove it, the better it got. Things loosened up, the brakes got better, the engine started running better. We had a limited fuel supply in at that time. We probably drove it around 10 or 15 minutes at the end of this day. But super excited, happy to have the truck finally powering itself, running again, and we'll continue onto the finer things in life, such as refining the brake system, putting the dual circuit master cylinder on, getting new tires on the truck, full brake inspection. But you know, as things sit now, we can show up and we can fire up Fire E49 and drive around the lot, which is it's a great feeling. So still much to do, but it's nice hitting these milestones that keep you motivated, keep you interested in the project, want to keep you moving and getting things better and fixing more things. So we hope you've enjoyed this video and all the ones previous. If you haven't seen those, check those out. Like, subscribe, come back to the channel and keep following along. We shouldn't be too far away from actually getting some chances to put Fire E49 back on the highway, and we hope you'll join us for when that moment comes. Take care, stay safe.